Whilst concluding the last batch of cloud gathering for the day, Minda spotted a guarded caravan appearing from beyond the hilltop bordering her lands, briskly traversing down the dirt road toward her farmhouse. The blanched mist blanketing the countryside was brushed aside by the commotion from the horses pulling the heavy equipage. She squinted, trying to deduce what banner they were flying, but it was impossible to be sure at this distance. From what outlines she could make, she concluded that it bore the depiction of one of the 9 keys, and given the circumstances it could only be the sigil of Luviel, the first breath. Minda had been awaiting them for well over a week now, and breathed a sigh of relief into her palm, closed it and pressed it to her chest atop her heart. She then threw her arm in a wide arc while simultaneously opening her clenched fist, scattering the now spent breath to the wind. This gesture was known to every devout Falkian as the rite of awakening, practiced by all of Luviel's faithful to give thanks to the goddess. Altor came up beside his wife and merrily kissed her on the cheek, while gently placing a rugged hand on her swollen belly.
"About damn time they decided to show up,"
he said with a gruff voice, thick with a rural accent. Minda looked up at him and was about to scold him for cursing in front of their unborn child, but she held her tongue as she saw no hint of anger in Altor's face. He merely regarded the approaching caravan with a tired smile and glazed eyes while gently rubbing her tummy. As if being caught daydreaming, Altor started and looked down at Minda, then with a fat index finger poked her damp and sweaty yet delicate button nose and said,
"Weren't you supposed to go easy on the gathering, Minmin? You're still zipping around the field and scooping up clouds like there's no tomorrow, whilst carrying our unborn heir to these splendid lands."
He said the last part with an ironic gusto and a flourish of his arms to indicate the fields they were standing in. Minda laughed derisively and with hands on hips snorted.
"If the sproutling can't handle a bit of farm work while being carried around safely by me, then how is the little one supposed to manage an entire farm once we're gone?"
Altor's big frame bobbed with a giddy chuckle, and through a broad grin plastered on his face, managed to sputter.
Minmin, the almighty queen of the clouds, who refuses to lay down and rest to make sure that her unborn infant will be as hardy as she herself is. Woe to anyone who claims differently.
Altor couldn't contain his mirth anymore and buckled with laughter. Minda squealed and charged at him with her fingers, poking at his ribs. Altor effortlessly hoisted up his pregnant yet small-framed life-mate and tried to slobber her with kisses while she did all she could to defend herself from the smothering attack of love. A few minutes passed with no party to declare a victor, and they finally settled for a draw before walking back to the farm, today's harvest packed safely on their backs, ready to greet the venerated Akashus and her entourage steadily approaching the farm. The diminutive Vivicantum Erebeth, or Mother Midwife as she was more commonly known in these parts, stood with her hands folded, patiently awaiting the arrival of the mist gatherers who had been working the fields when she approached. They had obviously underestimated the speed of her carriage and the pregnant woman's ability to walk steadily when so close to term, for she had arrived a long while before they finally returned. Erebeth felt no resentment towards them for being untimely, as the woman was supposed to be taking care of her unborn babe. However, she intended to scold her for being out and about at all. Not that it would help. Farmers out here were hardy folk, primarily out of necessity, but also in large part due to their cultural heritage, and Erebeth knew enough of the Morrowind family to know that if the young woman resembled her predecessors in the slightest, she was as fierce and stubborn as they get. She would probably never afford herself the luxury of sitting back and letting others do her intended work. Nevertheless, Erebeth remained steadfast and would give her a proper reprimand for her recklessness.
Doras,
She softly asked as she addressed the young, slender, yet well-built guard on her right.
Yes, Lady Vivificentum.
He immediately replied, not missing a beat.
would you be a dear and tell me the names of the expecting parents? The family name I remember quite well, but remained darkness. Both of their birth names escape me.
They are the Cloud Farmers, Minda and Altora Morrowind. Minda being the 11th generation landlord in this bloodline. We are here so you can assist in delivering the 12th heir to these lands.
Doris exclaimed with mechanical and rehearsed formality, no doubt schooled and beaten into him in the military. Erebeth looked up at him with a wizened but hard look, and he blinked, his facial expression changing from a stoic soldier to a panicking recruit in an instant. He knew he had overstepped.
I am well aware of the reason for my visit here, Guardsman Doras. I merely inquired about their names. Now, do you ever see me informing you of your prescribed duties?
Erebeth chided in a condescending tone.
No, Lady Erebeth, most certainly not. I apologize for my abhorrent lapse in etiquette and my ineptitude.
All is forgiven, Doras.
She said, sounding almost serene.
Just try not to lapse too many times, or you'll force me to transfer you to the woods of the Maiden.
Her voice dripping with horrible glee and foul promise. Doras swallowed hard. He knew the consequences of that transfer and had heard the tales of the mysterious maven. There would most certainly not be any more mistakes on his part. That was a given. He promptly answered with, albeit subdued, determination in his voice.
Yes, Lady Erebeth, I shall not falter any further in my duties. On my honor.
Oh, Doras, I have no need of your honor, just an understanding that I am a lady of my word, be it for ill or better.
Doras swallowed again and nodded in approval, her ominous promise chiseled into his mind.
Good lad,
Erebeth said, and gently patted him on his forearm. Sweating and a bit perturbed over their late arrival to greet their visitors, Minda and Altor finally reached their farmhouse, where Erebeth and her entourage were patiently waiting. Minda found them quite a fascinating sight to behold, partly because they rarely received visitors from the city here, but also because the group standing in her yard looked utterly alien from what she was used to. One of the guards, a tall, lean man, stood at complete rigid attention with a blank expression painted on his face. His heavy grey military trench coat and hat, both embroidered with the key of Luviel, weathered and worn by usage, further added to the man's imposing presence. The other, a small but broad-shouldered bald man in loose and completely bleached clothes, save for the key of Mayel painted on his tunic. He had a large scar across his throat and stood completely still, with a serene smile gouging a curved line on his face. He held up a large umbrella, shielding the mother midwife from the constant drizzle natural to these lands. Minda audibly gasped and held her hand to her mouth when she noticed the sigil of the goddess of death on the small man's clothes, fear evident in her eyes. Altor noted her distress, stepped forward, and was just about to speak when the frail-looking midwife held up a small bony hand and calmly stated,
Do not be alarmed, children. A representative of Mayel must always be present at birthing ceremonies, in case of stillborn babies and other similar events. It is merely protocol.
Then, with a crooked smile and a wink, she said,
But, to be candid with you, I bear no fondness of them either. However, he does a fine job shielding me from the ceaseless downpour.
The small man just shrugged, his smile never dowering. Minda visibly relaxed at the midwife's words and tugged at Altor's arm, pulling him back to her. He grunted, but obliged, his eyes still lingering on the silent man. Erebeth made a small gesture with her hand indicating the expecting parents and said,
Now, how about we make proper introductions,
Minda blinked and seemed only now to perceive the midwife properly. The tiny woman was clad in thick green and red robes, a large and ornamental sigil of Luvial hanging from her neck in a heavy chain, her lush and very long hazel hair tied in a simple ponytail. Minda's eyes were irreversibly drawn to the midwife's face though, for she had the looks of a young woman, perhaps even younger than herself, though she sounded and carried herself like an elderly crone. She was beautiful, not a blotch or wrinkle to speak of, as if Luvial herself had descended from the stars and kissed her skin. She finally looked into the midwife's eyes and saw the wisdom of a woman who had lived several lifetimes, gazing back at her patiently. This brought Minda out of her stupor, and with reverence she finally said,
Yes, of course, Mother Midwife. I am Minda of the Morrowind family, and this is my life mate Altor. We are delighted to see you and have eagerly awaited your arrival.
The joyous spark now returned in Minda's voice and demeanor. Erebeth gave a warm smile and replied,
Oh, child, I should full well know who you are, as I delivered you myself, your proud father, unable to sit still throughout the entire seance. On the other hand, your dear mother was as stout and brave a fighter as I have ever known. Maya preserved them. Nevertheless, traditions must be upheld and introductions be made.
She looked up at Altor, eyes pinched, as a weak-sighted elderly might do it when scrutinizing something, and finally said,
Ah, and Altor, of course, now I remember. The Wood Warden's son. How are your folk? Keeping away from the maven, I hope?
She said with a chuckle, a modest wheeze slipping through the young and full lips, another slight in the mask, betraying the age behind the beautiful face.
Mother Midwife?
Altor said with acquiescence.
Little Altor, no need to be so stiff around me.
Erebeth lectured the large man. She then bowed slightly and continued.
I am Erebeth, venerated vivificantum of Erain, presently on my second cycle as first Akashus of the Rhinelands.
She extended her arm to the right, indicating the trenchcoat-wearing guardsman.
This is my loyal captain of the guards, Doras. He and his guardsmen were provided to me by the cardinal himself, and they are, allegedly, supposed to protect me from waylayers and other sorts of trifles. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that we live in dangerous times, with bandits prowling the wilds and whatnot. Utter nonsense, if you ask me. I have traversed my parish for years on end, with nothing but my coachman and a nameless one to assist me, and have yet to encounter anything more dangerous than the threat of a severe trench cough. Speaking of my coachman, the fine gentleman you see over by the horses is my long faithful driver through the lands, who has accompanied me since he was but a boy. Isn't that right, Atri?
Most certainly, madame.
Atri answered with an aloof but no doubt Faucian manner. Minda, who had been too absorbed with the other newcomers, had not paid any attention to the driver, as he had kept to himself by the horses. But now, as she genuinely looked at him, he was by far the most curious of the bunch. He wore a classic dusky Faucian coachman garb with a top hat and black leather boots. However, his narrow face was wholly beardless, and his skin was smooth like a silk moth's wings and tanned as if having embraced the sun. He had small fangs protruding from his olive-colored lower lip, giving him an oddly feral look that stood in stark contrast to the finery he was wearing. He was seemingly conversing with the large animals, as if he could understand their puffs and whinnies. She had no idea what he was, but he reminded her of a group of merchants from Azai she had once seen at the capital as a child. Erebeth leaned in and whispered,
He is not one for pleasant conversation or idle chatter, least of all with humans, but he is a loyal companion nonetheless.
But what is he?
Minda replied in hushed tones, instantly feeling embarrassed by her adolescent inquiry.
Worry not, my dear. Atri is Ashar and hailed from the north, beyond the crater.
He is dirge-blooded.
Minda blurted, ignorant to the fact that she, in her surprise and awe, had just uttered a severe insult fabricated by the Faucians as lowbrow mockery, an insult that intentionally played on the word song-blooded, which represented the collective of the 4 Elden races who, in ages past, fractured from a single species when their civilization died. Atri immediately froze and looked up, staring daggers at Minda with condemning feline topaz eyes.
Minda Morrowind, you will coil that tongue of yours this instant.
Erebeth scolded her, her cheeks flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Realizing her poor choice of words and prejudiced tone, Minda looked to her husband for support, but he just stood with his head in his large hand, rubbing his temples. At length, however, he said,
That ever-flowing fountain of a mouth on you, Minmin. I love you, woman, but by Lady Effervescence you talk faster than you can think. She meant no offense by it, Mother Midwife, and she is very sorry for her poor choice of words.
Eltor continued, while nodding his head towards the coachman, indicating that he was speaking as much to him as he was to Erebeth. The embers in Atri's eyes died down as swiftly as they had ignited, and he simply nodded, continuing his interaction with the horses. Erebeth contemplated the apology for a short while, then nodded as well and smirked. She looked up at Altor and pointed a thumb at Minda, saying,
I take it this isn't a rare occurrence, considering your snappy apology, eh?
Minda was about to protest, as she felt like a child referred to as if not even present, but quickly thought better of it and almost hid herself behind the bulk of her husband in shame. Altor guffawed and said,
You have no idea. Luck stands with her that she is so lovable still.
He reached around, gently grabbed Minda, and pulled her beside him to kiss her on the top of her head. Minda smiled, ever so sweetly at him. She then proceeded to stomp on his foot. She could abide Lady Erebeth patronizing her, as she fully comprehended the unintended insult towards the driver and, in part, midwife. However, not her husband, no matter his size or proclivity for being correct. Erebeth burst into a cackle, genuinely enjoying the interaction of the young couple. She gave them a moment to settle things and was about to proceed, but seemed to have lost track of what she was doing. She then snapped her fingers in remembrance and extended her left arm to indicate the bald man shielding her from the rain.
And on my left is the representative of Mael, one of the Nameless, of whom we have already spoken. He does not require nor demand any further introduction.
The Nameless man bowed his head ever so slightly and winked at the young couple, much to their dismay.
With that in order, there remains an important proclamation from the governing body of Rayan, to which you must bear witness. Doras, please declare the edict.
Erebeth commanded the tall guardsman. Doris saluted and began to fiddle with his jacket, when Erebeth held up a hand and stopped him. She had perceptively noticed the unease of the expecting parents, and, with a gentle, almost grandmotherly voice, said,
Children, once again, I urge you not to be concerned. I assure you this is just a formality, and you have nothing to fear as long as you have and will remain devout.
Thank you, venerated one,
Altor said with a grim voice, and both he and Minda eased up, their weary smiles returning. Erebeth nodded and calmly said while folding her hands in front of her,
Please, call me Erebeth. The need for titles is long past us, dear boy. Now, Doras, if you will, continue.
The tall guard adjusted his weather-beaten tricorn, reached inside his damp trench coat, and pulled forth an ornamented iron depeche that contained a neat silver-colored scroll, of which he pulled off the string holding it together, and, with candor, announced,
It is hereby recognized by both the Cardinal and the Maven that a crisis of faith is spreading throughout the dominion of Rayan, the Forkian homelands, in the guise of an insidious epidemic. This sickness festers in the most innocent and precious to us all, assuming a shape so abominable and incurable that we are forced to take the most extreme of measures. These soulless husks, or Paleborn as they have come to be known, must be purged from existence whenever found. No remedy or alleviation is known to us mortals, only complete and righteous destruction of the empty vessels spawned by the immoral and heretical. Should you bear witness to the deliverance or safekeeping of such an abhorrent creature, it is implored that you do not pursue violent action against these heinous faithless, but instead seek out the local clergy, that they may conduct thorough cleansing and redemption upon them. Help thy neighbor and help thyself by adhering to this proclamation, and may the favor of the Outer Nine ever shine down upon you.
Minda, taken aback at the very orthodox and quite frankly zealous decree, was left with even more questions than before. However, she did not have a chance to voice them, as Erebeth unfolded her hands and gestured towards the main house, saying,
I think we have tarried far too long out here in the downpour. How about you show me your lovely house, child? I yearn to slake my curiosity on whether or not the place has changed since I helped bring you into this world.
Erebeth held out her arm, and Minda, longing to be out of the rain as well, gladly took it, and together they walked into the house, the nameless one of Mael, silently tailing them.